Hello, hello, hello. My name is Henry. I'm a doctor in regional Australia. This year I'm giving away 50% of everything I earn to charity. I'm coming at you live from the lands of the Yorta Yorta people. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm very excited to be coming at you once again. This is the second live stream I've done of this. I suppose I've been really appreciating all the feedback I've been getting from people. I would really encourage people to keep telling me what they think I'm doing right, what they think I'm doing wrong. I've received fantastic suggestions for different charities that people think I should be giving to. I'm absolutely loving it. Please keep it up. I suppose figuring out how to make the world a better place with money is really, really hard. And knowing what information to use to do that, to make your decisions on who to give to, is really, really hard. And I've been relying, I think, on 4 different types of information, which I suppose I just want to talk about. And the first type is expert opinion, expert advice. And this is the sort of information that you get from global development experts who are sitting in the UN or the WHO or the World Bank or in Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge. And we've been relying on that sort of expert advice for doing global aid, international development programs for many decades. And it seems like that hasn't necessarily worked all that well. We've spent, trillions and trillions of dollars over the last few decades to not see maybe as much improvement in sort of global living standards as we were hoping. And I think one reason for that might be that they're ignoring a different type of information, which is grassroots knowledge and ground level information, the knowledge that people who are living in those situations, experiencing the problems, experiencing the circumstances, know. They know more than anyone else exactly what problems they're facing. And it's information that experts can't possibly have. It's also information that is sort of unique to every single person in their situation. And in that sense, it's basically impossible to have all that information and to process it all. But if you don't account for grassroots, ground level information, and a few people have been pointing out that, that's something that is really important to account for when you're thinking about charity. And if you're not accounting for that kind of thing, you're really risking not getting a lot done. And another type of information that I'm relying on is trial-based information. And there's been a bit of a trend over the last 2 decades maybe to start to implement trials like clinical trials, randomized controlled trials, which are classically a thing that we use in medicine to figure out what treatments are effective, are more effective than placebo, or what surgeries, what drugs are working properly. And it's something that people have started implementing in a global development context. So you take an idea, who knows really whether it's going to work because there are so many factors involved. So they try it out. They, will try some global development initiative in a certain place and not try it in a certain other place and see which place has better outcomes. Of course, that kind of project and people that have been working on this kind of thing have won Nobel Prizes recently. So Professors Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee won the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics in 2019 for their work on RCTs for their work on bringing RCTs into the charity world, into working out how to, improve global living standards as much as possible. But the limitation of that kind of thing, of course, is that it's only really something that you can apply to easily quantifiable things. You can count how many girls, women are graduating high school. You can count what the underage pregnancy rate is, or how many kids are getting malaria in a given year, or what the mortality rate of children under 5 is. You can count that kind of thing, but how do you count something like, how much racial injustice a person experiences over their life? Or how inspired a community is by a certain piece of art or something. way more things that you cannot quantify than there are that you can. So trying to quantify things with randomized controlled trials, while it's a fantastic idea and has led to some really interesting things, it's also limited. And then the last piece of information that I'm going to rely on is crowdsourced knowledge, I suppose, which is why I'm really keen for everyone's feedback, and I want to hear from as many people as possible what you think I'm doing right and wrong, and what charities you think I'm giving to that are really good, and which ones you don't think are as good, and which ones am I not giving to that you think I should give to. And just let me know. Just send me messages, send me emails, leave me comments, write messages in the sky, strap a letter to a pigeon or something. I don't really care. I just want to hear. So today I'm going to be giving not live on air, because it's incredibly boring watching me fill out online forms and doing captures. But what I will do is talk through what I think I'm going to give to this week. So this is Henry's patented pyramid scheme. This is my giving strategy. And the basic idea of the giving strategy, the pyramid scheme, is that you give lots of money to the great charities, okay? And then you give even more money to the really, really great charities. That's the pyramid scheme. So let's start at the base of the pyramid for this month. This is a $1,441.25 donation to New Incentives. And New Incentives is an organization. It's what it does is it pays people in Nigeria to vaccinate their kids. It gives them about $2 for one course. No, not one course, for one dose of the vaccine in a course. And then at the final dose in the course, it gives them $6. That's a lot of money in Nigeria, and that's because we're in this bizarre situation on the planet where for some reason $1 to me is worth way, way, way more to someone in another country. And I suppose this kind of program is leveraging that. Does it work? Well, there's pretty good evidence that it does work. So this is the New Incentives website here. And GiveWell, which is the charity evaluator, and which is the centerpiece of kind of the effective altruism movement as well. This is a charity evaluator that was started by a couple of hedge fund managers a number of years ago, maybe 10 to 15 years ago. And it's all about using trials-based evidence, that kind of third type of information I was thinking about. They take the RCT-based knowledge and they put out a list of what they think are the top charities that are doing sort of the most bang for the buck kind of things. And they've written this fantastic report on the New Incentives organization, which is great to have a read through. I would recommend at least skimming it like I did. It's really long. It's a very long report. The program costs about $47 for one child, the sort of entire course, and that's including the administration fees that are going into it. It's not just, $2, $2, and then $5 at the end. You have to pay for the clinics and the vaccinations and the people running it and the people advertising it as well. But ultimately, the sorts of benefits you're looking for, like they've run it in RCTs, and there's good evidence that this is improving the percentage of kids that are getting vaccinated. So I'm not sure where the number is, but I'm fairly sure from memory that the number in the areas where they were implementing this strategy, the percentage of kids that were being vaccinated jumped from between 15 to 25% up to, I believe, 70% or 60 to 70%, which is pretty good. Now, this is something that sorry, you probably can't see that because of my face. This number here is something that GiveWell in particular really loves to do, and it's a little bit absurd because it's kind of impossible, but they try and put a number on how much they think via this strategy it would take to save a human life. And the number they've come up with for this particular program is $3,160. And, trying to quantify that is obviously completely absurd when there's so many factors going on. It's not just I send them $3,160 and they save a child, but it gives you a sense, a kind of ballpark figure of the kind of effectiveness that they're getting out of this charity and just how much difference you can potentially make here if you believe that number at all. So I'm giving the New Incentives Foundation $1,441.25, which is almost enough to save half a child's life if you believe that sort of a numbering system. Now, the second charity I'm giving to is She's the First. This is a charity. So one friend of mine suggested to me, and this is a suggestion I've heard before as well, and something that people say maybe if the effective altruism movement ignores a little bit, is empowerment of women, and particularly sort of young women, girls, with education as a means of elevating people out of poverty, elevating whole communities. And the idea is that not only are you empowering women with, education and giving them agency over their life and improving their potential for work, and education has all sorts of benefits, but beyond that, you're at the same time directly tackling gender inequality, and you're fighting things like forced marriage and underage pregnancy, which itself has lots of follow-on effects, not only health-wise, and there are health-wise effects to that, but also, you end up with smaller families, which allows wealth to sort of concentrate more and maybe improves people's lives in that way. So that's a concept. The concept of improving the education of girls is something that potentially has an enormous power. And there is actually if you're into it, there are clinical trials. And one was run by no other than Esther Duflo, the Nobel Prize laureate from 2019, who won the prize for her work with randomized controlled trials in global development. And this particular trial looked at providing scholarships. That was the specific intervention, scholarships to girls, young women in Ghana. And they saw, you can imagine trying to measure the impact of that kind of thing is, how do you even do that? The impact of education is lifelong, right? So if you're going to be trying to measure the kind of outcomes of that, an RCT that lasts a few years, you're obviously going to miss a bunch of things. It's going to be really, really hard. So the fact that they actually found any benefit at all, I think, is pretty impressive. And they did find benefit. They found that compared to the randomly selected group of girls who did not receive the scholarships versus the randomly selected group of girls that did, there was a 74% versus a 47% completion rate of high school. So that's about a 30% increase, or 25 or so. Thank you, Gus. Love the enthusiasm. You're an absolute legend. That's a pretty exciting result. And beyond that as well, beyond just the completion rates, they were finding already positive impacts on the sort of jobs that those girls were able to get. And also, I believe, on rates of pregnancy. I think they were decreased. And that's really exciting. So that particular trial doesn't specifically recommend She's the First, which is this organisation here. But She's the First is doing exactly that kind of thing. So they're providing scholarships to girls, young women. They're doing it through things like so they're doing it through community-based organisations, not just sort of doing it all themselves. And I suppose maybe the benefit of that is that they're, instead of trying to centralise everything and get all their tentacles, trying to figure absolutely everything out, they're distributing the workload to community-based organisations that might have a little bit more knowledge of what's going on the ground. That's kind of bringing in that grassroots level knowledge. So they operate through these, but I think primarily they're giving out scholarships to girls to complete high school. And if you look, this is another kind of charity evaluator site. This is Charity Navigator, which is an American site. They evaluate charities not based on their impact necessarily, which is what GiveWell tries to do. They more base it on their financials. They base it on how much they're spending on fundraising and how much they're spending on admin versus on actual projects, and how transparent they are about all their finances as well. Now, She's the First on Charity Navigator gets a 100 out of 100 score, which is pretty good. They also ignore kind of like 3 out of 4 of the categories for some reason, but it's pretty good still. If you look at the breakdown of how they spend about 84%, 85% on the actual programs. If you give $100 to She's the First, they will spend $84.30 on those programs that are helping girls, and they will spend about $8.50 on admin fees. That's 8%. That's not bad. You can't run a charity without spending anything on admin fees, by the way. You do need to spend something on admin fees because a charity without admin fees is not a charity. It's just a huge pile of money that you can't really do anything with because you don't have anyone organising it and kind of looking at where it goes and making sure that it goes to the right places. And then they spend 7% on fundraising as well. And fundraising makes me a bit uncomfortable always because I think in an ideal world, we would give without being asked. Like you don't wait until someone asks you to give money. You just, if you have money to give, you can just give it. You don't have to ask. And then people don't have to spend money on, trying to like wring it out of you with fundraising. That would be ideal. I would really encourage everyone to try and give without being asked. So I'm giving She's the First, which provides scholarships to young girls. I'm giving them $300, and I think they're a really fantastic charity. But let me know what you think. Do you think there's other charities out there that are maybe doing a similar thing that are better? I'm not sure. I kind of struggle a little bit to find charities that I'd heard of before doing this kind of thing. So yeah, let me know what you think. Yulari is the next charity I want to talk about. So this is one I'm giving $200 to. Yulari is kind of a similar thing. They provide scholarships to, this time, Indigenous Australian kids. And they provide scholarships so that Indigenous kids can go to, mainly to private schools actually, usually pretty high performing ones. It's an organisation that was started about 15 years ago by an Indigenous man, an Indigenous teacher called Waverley Stanley. And they've been operating since then. They do the scholarships, but they also provide support for kids as well. They don't just throw a bunch of money at them and then hope that they get through high school. They support them all the way through. And obviously, it's very similar to She's the First, the idea that by providing someone with education, you provide all sorts of, opportunities for agency over your own life and improving your whole life in so many ways, and not just improving your life, but improving the life of your whole community. And, it passes down the generations and it's all sorts of benefits. And I think it's a really cool charity. If you look it up in the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, which is kind of the Australian equivalent, it's actually a government-run equivalent of Charity Navigator. They, again, evaluate different charities mainly based on their financial transparency and what they spend on different things. They're spending about 70% of what you give them on their actual programs. Presumably that's their scholarships and their support programs around that. They do spend about 30% on admin, which, it seems like quite a lot, I suppose. You do need to spend something on admin to run a charity, but 30%'s getting to that kind of number where, I start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, like maybe there's a bit of administrative bloat going on. Who really knows? But I think ultimately what they're doing is absolutely fantastic, providing scholarships to Indigenous kids. I maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable as well about the private school aspect. I don't want to necessarily be supporting a two-speed education system where there's these private schools that get lots of money and perform really well, and then the public schools that get a little bit neglected. So I felt a little bit conflicted about that. Very keen to know what any of you out there think about Yulari and its support of private schools and how that kind of factors into it. Anyway, it's a bit flummoxing to me. Literacy for Life is the next charity I want to talk about. This is one I'm giving $100 to. Literacy for Life is, so last sort of fortnight I gave to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, and these two foundations are very similar from what I can see. They both focus on improving literacy rates in Indigenous Australians with the idea that, increasing education and increasing your literacy just kind of has heaps of flow-on effects. It's such a central part of being able to live kind of good at life and being able to have the agency to do what you want in your life. And it seems like a really cool program, much like the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. I think the difference here is that the Literacy for Life Foundation is run by Indigenous people, actually. And I suppose when you have an organisation run by the people that, members of the community that you're trying to help, you're getting that grassroots knowledge in there and that ground level knowledge, which, can maybe give you a bit of an advantage over an organisation that's not necessarily run by Indigenous people, which is actually what the Indigenous Literacy Foundation is, I think. I think most of the board members are not Indigenous themselves. The Literacy for Life Foundation claims to have 253 graduates of its literacy program so far over the time that it's existed. And if you look at the ACNC report on the Literacy for Life Foundation, they're running on about $2.14 million a year. And they've been running about 3 or 4 years. If I looked back on their financial reports, they're kind of operating mainly, I think they've used about $6 million over the course of their life. And if you start to get a bit mathematical about it, you divide $6 million between 253 graduates of the program. And, there are other benefits coming out of it as well. 38 Indigenous jobs and various things. But you get a number of like $20,000 per graduate, which, maybe seems like quite a lot. But then again, I mean, how do you quantify the benefits of giving someone the ability to read? It's such a powerful thing. The effects are on-flowing, and they are intergenerational, and they're really powerful. And maybe, yes, if you compare it to something like the New Incentives Program, it doesn't look particularly favourable necessarily, but if you compare it to something, which you should compare it to buying a new car or renovating your kitchen or having a sailing holiday in the Whitsundays, then I think it comes out really favourably. And I think what they're doing is ultimately fantastic, providing literacy programs for Indigenous Australians, which is why I'm giving them $100. Now, this next charity I want to talk about is the Islamic Relief Foundation. This is one that it's actually not the Islamic Relief Foundation, it's Islamic Relief Australia, which is the Australian branch of the Islamic Relief Foundation. And I know that because I think it's kind of funny that I'm donating to the IRA. This charity was recommended by a Muslim friend of mine, and they seem to do some really cool stuff. I was reading, they have a really nice report. They do all sorts of stuff. They do provide slaughtered animal meat to sort of for like Ramadan and different Muslim celebrations, which, like as a vegetarian, I'm not like all that hot on, but really I don't care all that much. I think they do some fantastic work. They do stuff like microfinancing in Myanmar, Indonesia. They support rehabilitation and health programs in Lebanon. They do disaster relief in Pakistan, Syria. They do education programs in Nepal. They help out with agricultural education and agricultural infrastructure in, the Philippines. So they seem to do some really neat stuff. If you look them up on ACNC again, you get a kind of breakdown of where their spending's going. They spend about 74% of what you give them on the programs that they're doing. That seems okay. They spend, they're spending about 12% on admin, which, seems kind of reasonable. A little bit hard to tell how much they're spending on fundraising, somewhere between 8 and 13%, 8 or 14%, which is maybe a little bit high. I think another reason I just want to talk about this particular charity is that there's a concept in Islam that I really, really love. And I'm not a Muslim myself, but there are 5 central pillars to Islam, 5 central concepts that you kind of have to abide by if you're to consider yourself classically a Muslim. And one of them is called zakat. And what zakat is it's an obligation to give 2.5% of everything you own, of the value of everything you own every year, to charity, which I think is such an interesting idea. It's basically a wealth tax that was invented by the Islamic community in 600 AD. And I think it's a really interesting idea because when you have a lot of money, it's quite easy to just have more money. You invest in an index fund, or you buy property if that's not too morally vexing to you, the idea of owning land. Or if you have a business idea and maybe some connections, you start a business or you invest in someone else's business and your money just grows and grows and grows, and that would be okay. Except that there are limited resources on the planet. There's limited land, and there's kind of limited jobs as well. It's not really possible anymore to just go out and start a bakery or start a burger company, or I don't know, start a construction company or something, because you'll just get undercut by all of the multinational organizations that crowd out every single industry. And I think maybe that's a product of sort of the accumulation of wealth and the, society turning into a massive oligopoly. And maybe one day a sort of redistribution of concentrated wealth will be necessary, whether that's by, philanthropy through billionaires like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates voluntarily giving up their money. I mean, can we really rely on an honor system to redistribute wealth? Maybe. Can you rely on the government to do it through a wealth tax? Well, it's kind of impossible to implement, because how do you count how many pieces of artwork a millionaire has stored in his basement, and then how do you get the value of all of those? How do you evaluate all of those pieces of artwork at the same time? The idea of if you can work out how to implement a wealth tax, you will win a Nobel Memorial Prize in economics. I think that's my call. But Islam figured it out in 600 AD. It was with the wealth tax. It was with zakat. It was voluntary, maybe a little bit of fear of eternal damnation, but I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think it's something we can all learn from. I absolutely love it. And the last organisation, I'm giving $100 to the Islamic Relief Australia. And the last charity I want to talk about is Wern of Karnak. I think this is a really interesting charity. It's not really a charity, it's a GoFundMe campaign. And this is run by an Indigenous artist, Arika Walu, based in Melbourne. And what Arika Walu is doing is basically just trying to buy land, trying to buy a piece of this land to give back to Indigenous people, to use for ceremonies and for gatherings and for sharing knowledge, for kind of growing food. Like the idea of food sovereignty is built into it. There's ideas of permaculture, ideas of traditional matriarchal societies of Indigenous culture are built into it. So sort of, there's aspects of feminism built into it as well. I think it's a really interesting campaign. This land was ultimately stolen from Indigenous people 250,000 years ago. And the idea of 250 years ago, rather. And the idea of buying it back, I think, really appeals to me. This is the kind of project that it's super hard to quantify, the value of this. I don't think anyone's run a randomized controlled trial on land back schemes, which are an international movement, by the way, land back. But you can imagine this having an enormous impact on people, giving sort of a kind of agency back to people whose land was unfairly taken from them. So I think Wern of Karnak's really cool. I'm keen to see what happens to it. I'm giving them $50. And that's kind of how I've split up the donations this fortnight. Again, I'm really keen for feedback from everyone. Already I'm getting sly messages on the side, which I love. I'll respond to all of them. Thank you. But yeah, let me know what you think. Stay groovy until next time. Peace out, I guess.